Well, here we go, brew day. We're brewing Australian sparkling ale. That's all our fermentables, that's our hops, and that's our yeast. It's our water volume, our mash steps, our fermentation steps, and we're good to go. So at the moment we're heating our water, which is here we are. So that's just a mirror of that. We've got our 16 litres of water in there. Enter our grain basket. This has got a sieve on the bottom, as you can see. Pop that one in. And when the time's right, we'll put our grain into there. All good. So this is all the grains, all the different types, colours, aromas, and that's the bulk one. So that's a pale ale. That's our ale malt, which we use 4 kilos in this batch of that one. And that's our bulk pilsner down the bottom there. So, grains into the hopper. Ready to go. This comes with a crank handle, but it also fits my battery reel, which makes it a little bit easier. And away we go. And that's our result. There it is. So you can see that's just opened the grain up, which lets out all the sugars and the enzymes. Basically what makes beer. It's all our brew there. So there's 3 different types of grain in there. You've got your ale malt, you've got crystal light, and acidulated, which is a bit of a bitter, sometimes called sour grapes, but gives it a bit of a tang on your tongue. In this one I'm also heating my sparge water, so we're going to heat that to roughly about 75 degrees, and that's our sparge water, which will tip into the top of our grain basket once the mash stage is finished. So here we have the hops. This is, once you've finished your mash, when you're on the boil stage, this is when we add all these hops. Now this is just a small selection of what's available. This is what I have on stock for the different recipes that I make. And for this particular one, I think we need, just have to double check that. So I need Centennial, Amarillo and Cascade. And you can see on there when they go in on the boil. So that one's at 60 minutes, the Centennial, 25 grams at 60 minutes. And that IBU reading is what it's all about. So that's the International Bitterness Units. So that's 26.9. So 25 grams at 60 minutes is going to affect my brew along the lines of that IBU. And then we've got Amarillo, which is 15 grams at 10 minutes, and Cascade, which is 15 grams at 10 minutes. Now they're more of a flavouring hop at that stage of the boil. So the 60-minute one goes in, that's a bitterness, because we're dealing with mostly sugar and enzymes. We've got to make it, it'll be sickly sweet if we didn't put those hops in. So we put those in at 60 minutes and that'll make it a bit bitter and take away that sweetness. And then the Amarillo and the Cascade, when they go in, that'll be our flavoursome beer. So that'll make your brew as hoppy as you want or as less hoppy as you want, according to how much you put in at what stage of the last 10 minutes of the boil. So that's our Cascade. That's our Centennial. And Amarillo is there. We've got another one of those, but that'll do for now. So here we go, 25 grams of Centennial. It doesn't take long. That's close enough. So there we have it. So the alarm's gone off. Our match temperature's reached, so it's time to add the grain. It's a bit hard to do this, but I'm going to basically tip that into there and I'll show you what happens then. Right, so there's our grain in our hopper. Now sterilisation is a big thing with beer, so everything you touch that's going to go into your brew, this is a bucket made up of solution. So I just make sure that my hands are clean, they're sterile, as well as everything that we put in there. I'll give that a bit of a wipe. And there we go. So now what I'm doing, just got to mix this up and make sure that there's no lumps in it. So this water is going to come up through the brew a bit. And just mix it up and just get rid of any lumps that there might be, right down to the bottom. So this is called the mash step. So basically this is where we suck out all those sugars and enzyme out of the grain. You can see there that it's already changed colour, the water. And this will, sometimes they do for roughly 90 minutes. Sometimes they're only 60 minutes, just depending on the recipe and what they're trying to achieve. So that's pretty good there. Now we put it on our top screen. This one is our top screen. Slide that down. Just going to push this in until it just sits on top of the mash, just like that. And then we pluck that little centerpiece out. We put this piece in. And that's our return for our water flow. You'll see that in a sec. So now it's lid on. And then we put our return circulation stem in. Add the grain, we've done that. Push set. And away we go. A bit hard to see, I'll just lift that lid for a sec. So that's going to keep it at a constant 65 degrees for this recipe, and that'll keep circulating the wort, which is our unfermented beer. You'll see it build up to the top of that little hole in a sec. And you can see already that the water has changed colour, so that's already sucking up the sugars and the enzyme out of the grain. Now it starts to spill. Now that, for this recipe, is going to do that for 60 minutes. So that's all up and running, so we're back to our hops. So we need 15 grams, it was 15 grams of Amarillo at 10 minutes and 15 grams of Cascade at 10 minutes. I can put those two in the, this is my second edition bottle. So here we go. Grams. There's not a lot of hop really, but that's the flavour, so they're pretty strong, they're pretty concentrated. So here comes the Cascade on top. There we have it. So I'll line these up over here. So that's my first edition, that's my bittering, and there's my flavoursome hops there. Just a bit of a close-up on the hops here. They don't actually grow on trees like that, obviously. You all know what a hop vine looks like, but so these are pelletised hops, and that's how they manufacture them and process them, and they are fairly concentrated. So I'm just going to jump ahead a bit now to our final stage, which is our fermentation stage. Now we end up with buckets like these. I'll show you two. These are in my fridge at the moment. So these two here, they're undergoing fermentation. And that one you'll see is bubbling away happily. And this one is yet to start. This was only done yesterday. And there's also a bottle of hops beside that one. Now that's a dry hop edition. I don't know if you can read that or not, but so dry hop edition, 28th of the 9th. So in 10 days time that gets put into the water as well. And away we go. So I'll just quickly show you. Now these are the yeast. So once we put it into that container I just showed you in the fridge, we add a yeast. Now there's all different types of yeast. This is just a very small selection, but this is all I use for my brews. These Empire Ale yeast and Strong Ale yeast, I use those for my black beers, my porters and stouts and so forth. Some of these are for lagers. That purple one there, that's for a wheat beer. SO5, that's what we need for this one. That's the most common yeast that I use. So I'll stick that one over there ready. And then there we've got dry lager yeast for pilsners and quite a selection. And they all got different characteristics, so you can all add or take away flavours from your beer as well. So a bit of trial and error with them, play around, just see how they all pans out, and if you get one that you really like, then happy days. See, that's all cleaned up nicely now, so it's just circulating that water through the wort. All our grains, it'll be sucking all those sugars, and you can see the colour coming out of that as well. 39 minutes to go. So while all this is happening, you've got time. I mean, you can go and do other stuff if you want, but when you're in the brew house, there's always something to do. So I've done 4 brews this weekend, so that's roughly, in old school Australian terms, that's 10 cartons of beer, which sounds like a lot, but it's not a lot. So this machine, this Grainfather machine, you can see here it's got mash 1 stage and then mash out, and the mash out temperature is 75 degrees for 10 minutes. Now this system will do that itself. So at the moment we've still got 28 minutes to go at 65. When that 28 minutes is up, it'll automatically heat the water to 75 degrees, which is the same as our sparge water in our urn. It'll heat the water to 75 degrees, and then the timer will start for 10 minutes, and that's called the mash out. And then we've got, as you can see there, we've got our sparge stage, which we're going to need 16.5 litres of water, and we'll be done. So after our fermentation stage, which you've seen in the fridge, this is what we've got. This is They're 19 litre kegs, they're post-mix kegs. We used to come with with Coca-Cola or other soft drinks in them, but they're perfect for the home brewer. 19 litres is roughly 2.5 cartons of stubbies, that is, not full size beers. So these ones I've just washed out and cleaned. So we start with this one, sodium bicarbonate. So you mix that up in a slurry of water and wash everything down with that, and then clean that all out, and then you go back to your steri sand, which is, I use a couple of different ones, but that's the one there, and that's only a few mil. It's plenty of liquid, foams up really well, and that's your sterilising stuff that you use. So basically once you've done all that, the kegs I'll gas them, put the lids back on and just gas them up, and that's how I store them. So once it's finished fermenting after your 10 days, basically it's a simple siphon. That's my siphon tube there. It's got that little toggle on the bottom so it sucks upwards, and try not to get too much sediment in the bottom of your keg. And from there we're going straight into our keg. Now this goes right to the bottom of our keg, and the theory of that is to try and keep as much oxygen away from your beer as possible at this stage. Now those kegs would have been filled with CO2, which is heavier than air, so filling from the bottom, the gas in theory should rise up, the oxygen will be on top of the gas, and right the way, like you fill them up almost to the brim, and they should not come in too much contact with oxygen at this point. So we're jumping ahead, our kegs have been filled, and this is my oversized kegerator, or a keezer as it's called, which is basically a household freezer which I've adapted to hold my beer kegs. Have a look in here. It all looks a bit confusing and a bit complicated with hoses running everywhere, but it's all quite simple. We've got a manifold for our gas coming in, which gives me 6 outlets. I've only got 5 taps. I say only 5 taps with a bit of a grin, but here we have it. So all these ones are kegged up. These are all beers that I've made, all different alcohol ratings, as you can see from the line. Some of them are dark beers, some of them are red ales, and it all varies. I've got a couple of little circulation fans there that just keep the air moving, and those black boxes are font pumps, which basically pump air up through this hose, keeps my line fairly cool, which then runs up to my outlets upstairs. So this is a means of keeping it at a constant temperature. I don't know why they're flashing online, they might not be, but they're not, they're solid as I look at them. So we've got it set at 1.5 degrees, that's the temperature I try and keep it at. Because I've had the lid open, it's gone up to 2.1, but that's an Inkbird temperature controller, and that'll keep it at that range. So it just turns the fridge on and off as needed, or the freezer in this instance, on and off as needed. And this is the end result. You thought I was joking when I said I had 5 taps, but there we go. All different types of beers. And how good does that look? So that's just coming up through that pipe that I showed you from down the bottom. I did actually have to drill a hole through my balcony floor, but things you've got to do. So guys, we're back at the freezer again. One thing I didn't show you was the carbonation process, which is basically your second fermentation. So we've siphoned into our keg, so we'll pick on this one here. So we've siphoned into that keg, we've sealed it up, now it's time to carbonate. So here's our bottle of CO2. You can see that's set to about 40 psi, that'll drop down to about 30 psi when I hook it up. And I use these 2 lines here. I can do 2 kegs at a time, carbonate 2 kegs at a time, and basically I use my outlet plug on these so it carbonates from the bottom. So that one goes onto there, push that down, click it in. We turn our gas bottle on first to do that so it doesn't. There we go. And then basically we click that on. the gas running into that. Purge that little bit of oxygen, or should be gas that's left in there. Just purge it out through that little vent there. That's that. Now roughly 48 hours. 48 hours at 30 psi. You can see that gauge just dropped down. Just a fraction above 30 psi. And that's your second fermentation, or the carbonation process, as in kegs. So instead of, if you're putting it into bottles, you'd have to put in some other form of additive, either sugar or dextrose or something like that, to basically put a bit of carbonation into your beer, a few bubbles. But with this keg system,